What if I told you, a man vanished in the 1990s, and when he came back nearly 3 decades later, he didn't just bring proof of something impossible. He brought back a question that could unravel everything we believe about reality. And more importantly, what if his story forces you to confront something deeply unsettling? What actually makes a person real, memory, or existence? In 2022, in rural Ohio, a man appeared at a stranger's doorstep. His clothes were worn, outdated, almost frozen in time. His face, aged, but not in the way you'd expect. There was something off about him. Not just exhaustion, but distance. Like he had been somewhere far beyond anything we could understand. He carried a weathered wooden box. Inside were journals, diagrams, notes scribbled in frantic handwriting, dates spanning decades. His name was Mike Markham. The problem? Mike had been missing since 1997. No trace. No body. No confirmed sightings. Just a burned-down garage, melted equipment, and a chilling note left behind. It's not about time. It's about how you see things. So where was he for 29 years? And why did he return looking like someone who had experienced far more time than the world had given him? The beginning, curiosity without limits. Mike wasn't a trained scientist. No university degrees. No institutional backing. Just a man with an obsession and a deep understanding of electronics, he taught himself. He grew up in rural Missouri, surrounded by open land, quiet nights, and long stretches of isolation. The perfect environment for someone who preferred machines over people. But let me ask you something. How often do the most dangerous discoveries come from individuals working alone, without rules, without oversight, without anyone telling them to stop? In the early 1990s, Mike began experimenting with high-voltage electricity. His setup was simple at first, a Jacob's ladder. 2 metal rods, electricity arcing upward between them in a dancing, crackling display. It was a common experiment. Predictable. Safe, relatively speaking. But one night, driven by curiosity, Mike introduced something new. A laser beam. He directed it straight through the electrical arc. At first, nothing seemed different. Then the arc changed. It stabilized. It narrowed. It became focused. And then something impossible happened. A small metal washer sitting nearby flickered. For just a fraction of a second. It disappeared. Not dropped. Not moved. Just gone. And then it returned. Exactly where it had been. No sound. No transition. Just absence, followed by existence. So what would you do in that moment? Walk away. Or lean in closer? For Mike, there was no question. He leaned in. The first signs that something was wrong. At first, the experiments were small. Controlled. Reproducible. Coins. Screws. Tiny metal objects. They would vanish for a split second, then return. But something else started to change. The air in the garage felt different. Heavy. Sharp. Almost metallic. There was a tension you could feel in your skin, like standing too close to a lightning strike. Animals began to avoid the area. Birds stopped landing nearby. His dog, once always by his side, refused to step inside the garage. It would sit at the doorway, whining softly, as if sensing something its instincts couldn't explain. Let me ask you this. If nature itself reacts with fear, should humans keep pushing forward? Mike didn't stop. He accelerated. When curiosity becomes obsession. By 1995, Mike's experiments had grown more complex and more dangerous. He needed more power, more stability, more control. And this is where things began to cross a line. He started stealing industrial transformers, massive devices capable of handling enormous electrical loads. He wired them into his system. The result? A surge of energy strong enough to affect nearby homes. Lights flickered. Electronics malfunctioned. Neighbors reported strange disturbances they couldn't explain. Authorities eventually caught him. He was arrested. For most people, that would have been the end. A wake-up call. A reason to stop. But here's the unsettling truth. Prison didn't stop Mike. It refined him. It gave him time to think. to plan, to perfect what he had started. And when he got out, he went right back to it. Only this time, his work was more focused, more controlled, more dangerous. When reality begins to break. After his release, Mike rebuilt his setup from the ground up. Stronger, more precise. And this time, the results were different. Objects didn't just flicker anymore. They vanished for seconds, sometimes longer. And when they came back, they weren't the same. A wooden block returned ice cold, far colder than its environment could explain. A fresh flower came back dried, brittle, as if days or even weeks had passed for it. Time wasn't behaving normally inside the field. And then Mike made a decision that would change everything. He tested something alive. A mouse. It disappeared. 5 seconds passed. Then it returned. Alive. But wrong. It moved erratically. Its breathing was rapid. Its eyes wide with panic. It refused food. It wouldn't rest. Within 2 days, it died. So here's the question you can't ignore. If something comes back physically intact, but mentally destroyed, where did it go? What did it experience in those missing seconds? And more importantly, did time pass differently for it? The final experiment. By early 1997, Mike had reached a point where curiosity had fully overtaken caution. He wasn't just observing anymore. He wanted to know, to feel it, to experience whatever existed beyond that field. In one of his final recorded calls, he claimed he had already begun testing on himself. Just briefly. Just partially. He described something that doesn't fit into any normal understanding of physics. Time didn't feel the same. Everything around him slowed down. The world moved like it was trapped in thick liquid. But he didn't. He could move normally. Think normally. Exist normally. While everything else lagged behind. It was as if he had stepped outside of time, without actually leaving it. Think about that for a moment. If you experience time differently than everyone else, would you still belong in the same reality? Would you even be the same person? Mike believed he was on the edge of something groundbreaking, something world-changing. He told people he would return, with proof. And then, nothing. Shortly after that call, Mike Markham disappeared. Completely. His garage was found burned to the ground. The fire was intense, hot enough to melt equipment, warp metal, and erase most physical evidence. But investigators did find something strange. A circular burn pattern. Perfectly shaped. Unlike anything typical fires leave behind. And then there was the note. It's not about time. It's about how you see things. No body was ever found. No confirmed sightings. No explanation. The case was eventually closed. Just another unsolved mystery. Or so it seemed. The return. Years passed. Then decades. Until 2022. A man appeared. Older, but not in a natural way. Not like someone who had simply aged 29 years. More like someone who had lived through something else entirely. He knocked on a stranger's door, carrying that wooden box. Inside were journals filled with fragmented thoughts, diagrams that seemed both advanced and incomplete, observations that didn't follow a linear timeline. Some entries described events that hadn't happened yet. Others referenced places that don't exist. And scattered throughout the pages were repeated phrases. Time is not a line. It folds. It breaks. It watches. So here's the question that lingers. If Mike truly returned, where had he been? A possibility too disturbing to ignore. Some believe he traveled forward in time. Others think he slipped into another dimension entirely. But there's a darker theory. One that raises even more unsettling questions. What if Mike didn't travel through time? What if he stepped outside of it? What if the place he entered wasn't bound by past, present, or future? And what if, to him, those 29 years felt like something much, much longer? Because when people spoke to him, they noticed something chilling. He didn't talk like someone who had been gone for decades. He spoke like someone who had been gone for a lifetime. or several. So ask yourself, if a person experiences time differently, if their memories stretch beyond what the world allows, are they still the same person who left? Or are they something else entirely? We like to believe reality is stable, that time moves forward in a straight, unbroken line, that every action creates a predictable reaction, that the world, at its core, is understandable. But Mike Markham's story doesn't just challenge those beliefs, it tears them apart piece by piece, leaving behind something far more unsettling. Because if even a fraction of what happened to him is true, then time isn't a line. It's something else entirely. Something unstable. Something we were never meant to touch. And maybe, something that can break us. So the real question isn't whether Mike Markham built a time machine. It's this. If you had the chance to step outside of time, would you take it? And more importantly, if you came back, would you still be you? Or would something essential stay behind? The message from nowhere. In 2006, nearly a decade after Mike vanished, a physics professor, someone who had briefly corresponded with him years earlier, received an email that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It came at 3:17 a.m. No subject line. No signature. Just a single sentence. I'm not dead. But I'm not exactly here either. Attached to the email were files, dozens of them. Complex diagrams. Equations. Schematics that didn't just suggest advanced thinking. They implied understanding far beyond Mike's known capabilities back in the 1990s. This wasn't the work of an amateur tinkerer anymore. This was something else. Something refined. Something evolved. But here's where it gets strange. The metadata on the files didn't make sense. Some timestamps appeared corrupted. Others suggested dates that hadn't even occurred yet. And when the professor tried to reply, the email address no longer existed. No server logs. No routing trail. No trace that the message had ever been sent. It was as if it had appeared, and then erased itself. So let's pause for a moment and ask the obvious question. How does someone send a message from nowhere? The return, 2022. 4 years, Mike Markham was nothing more than an urban legend, a strange story passed around forums and late-night radio shows. A man who built a machine. A man who stepped inside. A man who vanished without a trace. And then, in 2022, something changed. A couple renovating an old farmhouse in rural Ohio made a discovery that would pull the story out of myth and into something disturbingly real. Behind a false wall in the basement, they found a wooden box. Old. Worn. Carefully sealed. Inside, they discovered a collection of journals, dozens of them, each filled with handwritten notes, sketches, and entries spanning decades. The earliest entries were dated in the mid-1990s. But the later ones, they continued all the way to 2021. That alone didn't make sense. But then they found the photograph. It showed Mike. Older. Thinner. His face marked by exhaustion, like someone who hadn't just aged, but endured something. Something long. Something difficult. Tucked beneath the photograph was a note. Just one line. It worked, but not the way I thought. Now think about that carefully. If Mike disappeared in 1997, how do journals exist that continue for over 20 years after that? How do you leave behind records from a future you were never supposed to reach? And more importantly, who was writing them? The phone call. Before the couple could fully process what they had found, the phone rang. No caller ID. No number. Just silence, followed by a voice. A familiar voice. Calm. Measured. Tired. Please don't hang up, it said. I don't have much time. It was Mike. Or at least, someone claiming to be him. He knew things no stranger could know. Details from the journals they had just opened. The exact location of the box. Even the layout of the farmhouse before renovation. There was no doubt. Whoever was on the other end of that call had been there. Can I come see you? He asked. And despite every instinct telling them not to, they said yes. Would you have done the same? What really happened? When Mike arrived, something felt off immediately. He wasn't what they expected. Not a ghost. Not a madman. Just a person. But a person who looked worn down in a way that didn't match his age. His eyes carried something heavy, like someone who had seen too much and understood even more. He sat down, took a long breath, and said something that would redefine everything they thought they knew. "I didn't travel through time," he said. "Not the way people think." He explained that when he activated the machine back in 1997, something went wrong. Not an explosion. Not a visible malfunction. Something quieter. Something deeper. "I didn't go anywhere," he continued. "I just slipped. Out of sync." That's how he described it. Imagine tuning a radio just slightly off frequency. The station is still there. The signal still exists. But it's distorted. Faded. Unstable. "That's me," Mike said. "I'm still here. Just not fully connected." The real horror. At first, the effects were subtle. He could still move. Still interact. Still exist. But something was wrong. People he spoke to would forget him moments later. Conversations didn't stick. Faces turned blank when he reintroduced himself. At first, he thought it was coincidence. Then stress. Then paranoia. But the pattern became impossible to ignore. "I'd talked to someone for 10 minutes, he said. "And as soon as I walked away, it was like I never existed." Let that sink in. Not invisibility. Not disappearance. Something far worse. Presence, without permanence. Let me ask you something unsettling. If someone interacts with you, speaks to you, hears your voice, but cannot remember you moments later, did that interaction ever truly happen? Or does reality depend on memory to exist? Mike believed he hadn't broken time. He had broken his connection to it. The slow erasure. As years passed, the effect intensified. It wasn't just strangers anymore. Anyone he met struggled to retain him. Employers forgot hiring him. Friends forgot knowing him. Even systems, records, documents, seemed to lose him over time. He adapted. He learned to write everything down. To leave trails. To create anchors in the physical world. Because memory alone could no longer hold him. "I didn't disappear," he told them. "I became forgettable. But not in the normal sense. Not boring. Not unimportant. Fundamentally unretainable." Think about that. What's worse than being forgotten? Being impossible to remember. The journals. The journals in the box weren't just records. They were survival. Every entry was an attempt to preserve himself. Names of people he met. Places he stayed. Events he experienced. All written with urgency, like someone racing against something invisible. In one entry, he wrote, "I met someone today. We talked for hours. She laughed. She understood me. I think she cared. But I know tomorrow, she won't remember any of it." In another, "I left a note for myself in a place I knew I'd return to. When I came back, it was gone. Or maybe, I just couldn't find it again." Reality itself seemed unstable around him. Not breaking. Not collapsing. But slipping. Like trying to hold water in your hands. Why he came back. By 2022, Mike knew something terrifying. He wasn't just being forgotten faster. He was approaching a point where memory might not hold him at all. Not even for seconds. "I think there's a limit," he said. "A point where I won't be able to stay long enough for anyone to notice me." That's why he returned. Not to fix anything. Not to prove anything. But to leave something behind. Proof. Evidence. A record that he existed. Because once memory fails completely, there's nothing left. So ask yourself this. Is existence defined by being alive? Or by being remembered? The final goodbye. After telling his story, Mike stood up. He looked around the room slowly, as if trying to memorize it. Or maybe, trying to let it memorize him. "Write this down," he said. "Everything." And then he left. The door closed. Silence filled the room. And almost immediately, something began to slip. His voice became harder to recall. His face blurred in their minds. Details faded. Panic set in. They grabbed paper and started writing everything they could remember. Every word. Every expression. Because it was already disappearing. Within minutes, they struggled to describe him clearly. Within hours, the memory felt distant. And within days, it felt like a dream. Something that might not have happened at all. So let me ask you, what kind of reality allows a person to vanish? Not from the world, but from the mind. The last question. Today, the evidence still exists. The journals. The photograph. The note. They are real. They can be touched. Studied. Analyzed. But Mike himself, he's gone. Not physically. Not completely. But functionally. Because no one remembers him long enough to hold on to him. And that leaves us with one final, haunting question. What truly makes you real? Your physical presence? Or the ability of others to remember you? Because if memory is the anchor that ties us to existence, then losing it isn't just forgetting. It's erasure. Somewhere out there, Mike Markham may still be walking. Still breathing. Still experiencing the world. But never staying long enough in anyone's mind to matter. Imagine passing him on the street. Maybe you already have. A brief conversation. A strange feeling. And then, nothing. Gone. Not into darkness. Not into death. But into something far more terrifying. Unmemory. And now that you know his story, let me ask you one last time. If you met him, would you remember? Or has he already been forgotten again?